Days before my 25th birthday, I knew my sister would fake a breakdown to make my parents hijack the event. It had become a pattern I could not ignore anymore. So, when they chose again, I left for good. 9 years later, they came to claim the empire I built from nothing, and I handed them the most humiliating reality check of their lives. But to make you understand how sweet that moment was, I have to take you back to the beginning. These days, my mornings start long before the sun comes up. I walk down to the docks of Callahan Classic Boats, the restoration yard I own on the edge of a cold, deep lake in Michigan. I breathe in the smell of old mahogany, fresh marine varnish, and damp pine needles. I run my hands over the sleek, polished hull of a 1950 Chris that my crew and I spend 8 months bringing back from the dead. It is quiet, it is peaceful, it is entirely mine. I built this life with splintered fingers, a broken back, and a stubborn refusal to ever be someone's stepping stone again. People who visit the yard see the success. They see the expensive boats, the bustling crew, the waiting list that stretches out 2 years. They assume I was handed a family legacy. They have no idea that my family was the very thing I had to escape to survive. Growing up, my house was a stage, and my mother, Sabine, was the ruthless director. There was only ever one star of the show, and that was my younger sister Fallon. My father, Alden, was the stagehand who just nodded, smiled, and kept his head down to avoid Sib's wrath. And me? My name is Merritt. I was the understudy, the prop, the invisible problem solver. In my family, being the strong one was not a compliment. It was a life sentence. It meant you required zero maintenance, zero affection, and zero resources. It meant your achievements were expected and ignored. While Fallon's ordinary daily functions were celebrated like Olympic victories, Fallon was delicate. Fallon was sensitive. Fallon had anxiety. Fallon needed our support. Those were the mantras repeated in our house until they formed the very foundation of our reality. If you have ever been the scapegoat in a toxic family dynamic, you know the exact flavor of this particular humiliation. You know what it feels like to have your entire existence minimized so another person can take up all the oxygen in the room. I remember exactly when I realized the rules of the game. I was 12 years old. I had spent 3 weeks building a working motorized model of a lock system for the regional science fair. It was complex, it was messy, and I did it entirely by myself at the kitchen table late at night so I would not bother anyone. The day of the fair, I won first place. A blue ribbon, a cheap plastic trophy. I was so proud my chest hurt. I waited on the front steps of the school gym in the pouring rain for my parents to pick me up and take me out for pizza like they promised. I waited 1 hour, then 2. The rain soaked through my jacket. The cardboard base of my project started to warp and dissolve. The gym doors locked behind me. Finally, the school janitor let me use the office phone to call home. My mother answered on the 4th ring, sounding annoyed. When I asked where they were, she sighed a heavy, aggrieved sigh. She said, "Merritt, we cannot deal with your little science thing right now." Fallon had a terrible panic attack. Her nail broke down to the quick at the salon, and she was hyperventilating. We had to take her to get a calming smoothie and sit with her in the dark. "You are strong. You can walk home." It is only 3 meters. I walked home in the rain. I carried my ruined project in my arms. When I walked through the front door, dripping wet and freezing, they were sitting on the couch, watching movies. Fallon had a bandage on her pinky finger. Nobody asked about the fair. Nobody asked about the ribbon in my pocket. I went in my room, threw the ruined cardboard in the trash, and never asked them to show up for me again. I learned to shrink. I learned to pay for my own clothes, my own school supplies, my own gas. By the time I was in my early 20s, I was working 2 jobs, saving every penny, and living in a cheap rented room across town. I thought distance would make it better. I thought if I asked for absolutely nothing, they might occasionally give me something. A phone call, a birthday wish, a single moment where the spotlight drifted my way. I was wrong. Toxic families do not reward independence. They resent it. They view your ability to survive without them as a personal insult, while simultaneously demanding you remain available to serve the golden child whenever required. And I was about to learn that lesson in the most brutal way possible. I had survived 25 years of cancelled plans, ignored milestones, and silent rejections. But I had no idea that my 25th birthday would be the match that burned the whole bridge down. For my 25th birthday, I decided to do something I had never done before. I decided to matter. I had been working extra shifts at a hardware store and doing bookkeeping on the side. I saved up $500. It was a fortune to me back then. I wanted a real dinner, a milestone celebration. I went to a nice upscale steakhouse downtown, the kind with thick carpets and heavy silverware, and I put down my $500 to reserve a private dining room for 8 people. I invited my parents, Fallon, and a few coworkers. I did not ask my parents to pay for a single thing. I did not ask them to organize anything. All I asked was that they show up at 7:00 on a Saturday evening to eat a free meal, and acknowledge that I had been alive for a quarter of a century. I went to their house on a Tuesday to deliver the invitation in person. I stood in the kitchen. Sibyl was polishing the granite countertops. Alden was reading the paper. Fallon was scrolling on her phone, complaining about how stressful her part-time job as a receptionist was. I told them about the steakhouse. I told them the time. I told them I had already paid the deposit. Sibyl did not even look up from her polishing, she said. A steakhouse. That is very heavy food, Merritt. You know Fallon has a sensitive stomach, but I suppose we can make an appearance. It was not an enthusiastic yes, but it was a yes. For the next 3 days, I let myself feel something dangerous. I let myself feel hope. I bought a new dress. I imagined us sitting around a table, acting like a normal family, laughing, sharing a toast. The illusion shattered on Thursday afternoon. I was at work when my phone buzzed. It was a call from the steakhouse events manager. She sounded cheerful. She said, "Hi, Merritt. I am just calling to confirm the changes to your reservation for Saturday night. We have updated the custom banner and we will apply the $500 deposit toward the champagne toast as requested." I froze in the aisle of the hardware store. I felt the blood drain from my face. I gripped the phone tighter. I said, "I am sorry, what changes? What banner?" The manager paused, clearly confused. She said, "Your mother Sibyl called an hour ago. She said there was a change of plans. She asked us to change the banner from Happy Birthday Merritt to Congratulations Fallon on your recovery. She said you were generously donating your deposit to cover the premium champagne for the family toast." A cold, ringing silence filled my ears. I could not breathe. They were not just canceling on me, they were hijacking my event. They were stealing the room I booked, using the money I saved with my own calloused hands to throw a party for my sister. I thanked the manager, hung up, and walked straight out the front doors of the store. I drove to my parents' house in a blind blur. I pushed the front door open. My mother was sitting at the kitchen island writing out place cards. Fallon was sitting across from her, testing out different shades of lip gloss. I stood in the doorway and stared at them. I asked my mother, very quietly, why she had called the restaurant. Sibyl sighed, setting down her pen. She gave me that patronizing, pitying look she always used when she was about to do something cruel. She said, "Merritt, please do not make a scene. Fallon just went through a terrible breakup. She is emotionally devastated. She needs a win right now. We thought since you already had the room booked, it would be the perfect venue to lift her spirits. You are turning 25, it is not a big deal. You are the strong one. You do not need a fancy dinner." I looked at Fallon. She pouted her lips in the mirror compact. She looked up at me with wide, fake, innocent eyes. Fallon said, "Come on, Merritt. Can you not just let me have this one day? I am so fragile right now. I cannot handle any negative energy." I looked from my sister to my mother, and then I looked at my father, who was standing by the refrigerator, staring intently at a jar of mustard, pretending he was deaf. In that moment, a massive, terrifying clarity washed over me. I had spent my entire life trying to fill a cup that had a hole in the bottom. No matter what I did, no matter how much I accomplished, no matter how small I made myself, I would never be anything to them but a resource to be consumed by Fallon. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not flip the table. I just nodded. I said, "You are right. I am the strong one. Enjoy the champagne." I turned around and walked out. I got into my car and called the restaurant back. I told the manager that there had been a misunderstanding. I canceled the entire reservation. I told them to keep the $500 deposit as a cancellation fee just to ensure that the room was legally released and my family could not use it. It was the best $500 I ever spent. I drove back to my rented room. I pulled a canvas duffel bag from the closet and started packing. 2 pairs of jeans, heavy boots, a handful of shirts, the small cash box I kept hidden under my bed. I packed like a ghost, preparing to leave a haunted house. I did not know exactly what I was going to do. I only knew I had to drive north. For hours north, past the city lights, past the suburbs, up into the deep woods and cold lakes, up to the only person who had ever looked at me like I was a human being, my grandfather, Arthur Callahan. I threw my bag into the passenger seat, turned the key in the ignition, and drove into the dark. What I did not know then was that I was not just running away. I was driving toward a war that would take 9 years to win, but if they wanted me to be the strong one, I was about to show them exactly how terrifying my strength could be. The drive north was a blur of black pine trees and empty highways. Sometime around midnight, the heater in my beat-up sedan stopped working, and the Michigan chill seeped into my bones. But I did not care. For the first time in my life, I was moving forward without dragging the dead weight of my family's expectations behind me. I pulled onto the gravel driveway of Callahan Classic Boats at 2 in the morning. The headlights swept across the property. It was worse than I remembered. The main boat shed was leaning. The paint on the office cabin was peeling off in long gray strips. Weeds choked the dry docks. It looked like a graveyard for forgotten wood and rusted metal. The porch light clicked on. The front door opened and a silhouette stepped out into the freezing night. It was my grandfather. He was 70 years old, wrapped in a faded flannel robe, leaning heavily on a cane. He did not ask why I was there. He did not ask why I was crying, even though I did not realize tears were freezing on my cheeks. He just shuffled down the steps, wrapped a thick, rough arm around my shoulders, and guided me inside. There was a pot of beef stew keeping warm on the stove. He poured me a bowl, sat across from me at the scarred wooden table, and watched me eat. When I finally finished, I looked down at my hands. I said, "Grandpa, I have nothing. I canceled my own birthday. I left them. I do not think I can ever go back." He let out a long, slow breath. His eyes, the color of the lake before a storm, met mine. He said, "Good. The only mistake you made was waiting this long. You stay here as long as you need. I have got more wood than money and more work than time." I slept for 14 hours straight on the lumpy sofa in his spare room. When I woke up, the sun was high, and I could hear the faint sound of a sander coming from the main shed. I made a pot of coffee and walked into a small, cluttered office to find a mug. The desk was buried under mountains of paper. As I moved a stack of old boat blueprints, a manila envelope slid to the floor. The clasp popped open and a thick document spilled out. I picked it up to put it back, but my eyes caught the bold black letters at the top of the page. Reverse mortgage agreement. I frowned and started reading. It was a contract from a predatory lending company. It was designed to slowly drain the equity out of the boatyard property, handing over cash now in exchange for signing the deed away upon my grandfather's death. But the most sickening part was not the contract itself. It was the sticky note attached to the front. It was written in my mother's flawless, sweeping cursive. It read, "Dad, sign where highlighted and mail it back by Friday. Fallon's therapy bills are piling up and she needs the down payment for the new car to feel safe driving again. Do not be stubborn. We need this cash. Seville." My stomach violently turned. My grandfather was sitting on a gold mine of lakefront property, but he was cash poor because he could no longer do the heavy restoration work. And my parents, instead of helping him, were trying to force him into a predatory loan that would leave him with nothing, just to fund Fallon's imaginary traumas and luxury lifestyle. They were bleeding him dry, just like they had bled me. I walked out to the shed holding the papers. Grandpa Callahan was sitting on a stool, slowly sanding a small piece of trim. His breathing was labored. I held up the papers. I said, "Were you going to sign this?" He stopped sanding. He looked at the envelope and his shoulders slumped. A deep shame crossed his face. He said, "Civil calls every day. She says Fallon is in crisis. I do not have cash merit, I just have the dirt and the wood. Sometimes it is easier to just high paper to make the phone stop ringing." I walked over to the trash can in the corner of the shed. I ripped the reverse mortgage agreement into quarters, then into A's, and dropped the pieces into the sawdust. I looked at him. I said, "The phone is going to stop ringing because you are never giving them another dime. I am going to work this yard. I am going to rebuild this business. We are going to make our own cash." He looked at me for a long time. Then he smiled. It was a small, dangerous smile. He reached over to a peg on the wall and pulled down a pair of thick, cracked leather work gloves. They were stained with oil and varnish. He tossed them to me. I caught them against my chest. He said, "Put them on. When your hands bleed enough to fill them out, they will fit just fine. Grab a scraper. We have a hole to strip." That was day one, the day I stopped waiting to be rescued and started building my own fortress. I did not know how to run a boatyard. I barely knew a port from a starboard, but I knew how to work until I could not stand, and out here there was no mother to steal the credit and no sister to fake a crisis. Out here, the wood did not lie. If you sanded it right, it shined. If you cut it true, it fit. I blocked my parents' phone numbers. I blocked Fallon. I vanished from their world completely, and in the silence they left behind, I finally began to hear my own voice. The next 3 years were a crucible of physical agony and financial terror. I poured every ounce of my energy into Callahan Classic boats. My hands were perpetually blistered, covered in chemical burns from marine epoxy, and stained dark brown from wood stain. I woke up at 4 in the morning, managed the books, ordered supplies, and then spent 12 hours a day doing the brutal, back-breaking physical labor of restoring rotting boats. We started small, replacing floorboards on aluminum fishing boats, fixing outboard motors, earning a few hundred here and there, just enough to keep the lights on and pay the property taxes so the bank would not take the land. And then I found the Lorelei. She was a 1962 wooden runabout, abandoned in a storage shed 3 towns over. The owner had died and the hole was so rotten you could push your thumb through the wood. Nobody wanted her. I bought her for $800 using the last of my savings. I towed her back to the yard, and for 14 months she became my obsession. I stripped her down to the bare ribs. I learned to steam bend. I applied 20 coats of varnish by hand until the hole looked like liquid glass. I poured my anger, my grief, and my desperate need for survival into that wood. By my 3rd year at the yard, word had started to spread around the lake. People were talking about the young woman at Callahan's, who was doing museum-quality restoration work. The waiting list began to form. We were finally turning a real profit. Grandpa Callahan stopped worrying about the bills and started smiling again. I even hired 2 young apprentices to help with the heavy lifting. Then, just as I was about to sign a massive, lucrative contract to restore a fleet of vintage boats for a luxury lakeside resort, the hammer fell. It was a Tuesday afternoon. A white government truck pulled into the gravel lot. 2 agents from the Environmental Protection Agency stepped out carrying clipboards and looking grim. They walked straight up to me. The lead agent said, "Are you Merritt Callahan? We received an anonymous tip with photographic evidence that this facility is illegally dumping toxic marine varnishes and heavy engine oil directly into the lakehead. We are issuing an immediate stop work order pending a full soil and water investigation." My heart slammed against my ribs. A stop work order meant I could not touch a boat. It meant the resort contract would evaporate. It meant bankruptcy. I panicked. I said, "That is impossible. We use a certified disposal company for all our chemicals. We keep impeccable records. I can show you the manifests." The agent shook his head. He walked me around to the back of the main shed near the tree line that sloped down to the water. There, soaking into the dirt, was a massive fresh puddle of black engine oil and chemical solvents. Empty, unmarked jugs were tossed carelessly into the brush. I stared at the black sludge in absolute horror. Someone had intentionally dumped it there to frame the yard. The EPA shut us down. For 3 days, I sat in the office watching my clients drive away, watching my banking account bleed out from the emergency environmental cleanup fees. I felt the familiar, suffocating weight of defeat. I thought I was cursed, but I was not the scared 25-year-old girl anymore. I was a business owner. I went down to the local marina to talk to Hayes. Hayes was the harbor master. He was tall, quiet, had hands as rough as mine, and for the past 2 years, he had been the only person outside of my grandfather who made me feel safe. He supplied our yard with parts, and occasionally brought terrible diner coffee when I was working late. I sat in his tiny marina office, shaking with anger. I told him about the illegal dump. I told him it was a setup. Hayes did not offer empty sympathy. He just turned to his computer monitor. He said, "Merritt, the access road behind your shed connects to the county service road. The county put up trail cameras last month to catch people dumping old mattresses. Let us make a phone call." Hayes had a buddy in the county surveyor's office. 24 hours later, we were sitting in the dark, watching grainy black and white security footage from the night before the EPA inspection. On the screen, a silver SUV pulled onto the dirt road behind my shed at 2 in the morning. A woman got out. She opened the trunk, pulled out 2 massive plastic jugs, and poured the thick black liquid directly into the soil. When the woman turned her face toward the camera lens to check her surroundings, my blood turned to absolute ice. It was Aunt Rowena, my mother's younger sister, Sibyl's ultimate flying monkey and loyal henchman. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. This was not a random act of vandalism. This was a targeted assassination of my livelihood. My mother had figured out that I was succeeding. She realized I was not going to fail, crawl back home and beg for forgiveness. So, she sent Rowena to destroy my business, hoping the fines and the scandal would bankrupt me and force me to sell the land. They wanted me broken. They needed me dependent. I sat in Hayes's office, staring at the frozen frame of my aunt's face. Hayes put a heavy, warm hand on my shoulder. He asked quietly, "Do you want me to call the police?" I looked at the screen. A cold, terrifying calm settled over me. The kind of calm that comes right before a storm levels a city. I said, "No, give me a copy of that video. The police will just give her a fine. I want something much, much worse. I want to build an empire so high that when they look up at me, the sun blinds them." I took the video to the EPA. I proved the dumping was a targeted act of sabotage by an arranged family member. The stop work order was lifted. The cleanup fees were shifted to Rowena, who was slapped with federal environmental fines so massive she had to remortgage her house. I never said a word to my mother about it. I let her watch from afar as her plan failed spectacularly. I went back to the yard. I finished the Lorelei. I sold her at a classic boat auction for $85,000. I used the money to build a new state-of-the-art ventilation shed. I hired 3 more mechanics. I stopped surviving. I started conquering, and I prepared for the day they would inevitably come back. Year 5. If you had driven past Callahan Classic boats in Year 5, you would not have recognized the place. The lean-to sheds were gone, replaced by massive temperature-controlled steel buildings. The gravel lot was paved. We had a showroom facing the lake. My name was featured in 2 national maritime restoration magazines. I was 29 years old. My bank accounts were heavy, and I had Hayes standing by my side, not just as a harbor master, but as my partner in every sense of the word. I had built an iron wall around my peace, but toxic families are like black mold. Just when you think you have scrubbed them away, they find a new crack to seep through. The crack opened on a random Thursday in late October. My cell phone rang with an unknown number. I answered it without thinking. It was Sybil. Her voice was dripping with a sugary, unnatural warmth that immediately made the hair on my arms stand up. She said, "Merritt, darling, it is Mom. Please do not hang up. We have missed you so much. We have been reading all about your little boat business. We are just bursting with pride." I stood in the middle of my gleaming showroom, holding a clipboard, feeling my jaw lock. 5 years of absolute silence. 5 years of letting me bleed and build alone, and now suddenly she was bursting with pride. I kept my voice deadpan. I said, "What do you want, Sybil?" She feigned a gasp of hurt. She said, "I want to see my daughter, your father." And I want to celebrate your success. We want to take you out to dinner in the city. Just the three of us. No drama, just a family reconnecting. Please, Merritt, give us a chance to show you we have grown. I should have said no. I knew better. But there is a pathetic, broken part inside every scapegoat child that still desperately wants to believe that maybe, just maybe, their parents have finally woken up. That maybe the success I built had finally earned me a seat at the table. I agreed to meet them on Saturday night at an upscale Italian restaurant in the city. I wore a tailored suit. I drove my own truck. I walked into the restaurant feeling like a CEO. But the moment I saw Sabeel and Alden sitting in a plush leather booth, my chest tightened with the old familiar anxiety. They stood up. They hugged me. They ordered expensive wine. For the first 45 minutes, it was surreal. They asked about the yard. They complimented my clothes. Alden even smiled and told a joke. It felt like a simulation of a loving family. Then the waiter cleared the dinner plates and the simulation crashed. Sabeel reached into her designer handbag. She pulled out a thick manila folder and slid it across the white tablecloth, right past the glowing candle. She smiled. It was a sharp, hungry smile. She said, "Merritt, sweetheart, since your little boat project is doing so well, we knew you would be thrilled to help your sister." I stared at the folder. The illusion evaporated instantly, leaving behind a cold, brutal reality. I did not touch the paper. I said, "What is this?" Seville leaned in, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. She said, "Fallon has found her true passion. She is launching a luxury organic cosmetic line. It is going to be massive, but the bank is being ridiculous about her lack of credit history. She needs a commercial loan for $200,000 to secure the manufacturing warehouse." Alden finally spoke up, refusing to meet my eyes. He said, "We need a guarantor, Merritt, someone with substantial business assets to co-sign the loan. Your boatyard is assessed at a high value now. You just need to sign this paper putting the yard up as collateral. It is just a formality. Fallon will pay every cent back." I sat frozen in the booth. The sheer, staggering audacity of it knocked the breath out of my lungs. They did not invite me here to celebrate my success. They invited me here to harvest it. They wanted me to risk the empire I built with my own blood, sweat, and tears to put a lien on my grandfather's land, so Fallon could play businesswoman with cosmetics. They wanted to tie a $200,000 noose around my neck and hand the rope to the sister, who had never worked a hard day in her life. Sibyl pushed a silver pen across the table. She said, "We are family, Merritt. This is what families do. They lift each other up. And frankly, after everything we did raising you, it is the least you can do to pay us back." I looked at the pen. I looked at the folder. Then I looked at the glass of ice water sitting next to my plate. I did not yell. I did not cry. The scared 25-year-old girl who canned her own birthday was dead. The woman sitting in the booth was forged in sawdust and steel. I picked up the glass of ice water. I maintained absolute unbroken eye contact with my mother, and with a flick of my wrist, I casually tossed the entire glass of water and ice cubes directly across the table. The water hit Sibyl square in the chest, soaking her silk blouse, dripping down her shocked face and instantly ruining the loan documents on the table. Sibyl shrieked. The entire restaurant went dead silent. Diners turned to stare. Alden jumped up, grabbing napkins in a panic. Sibyl gasped, her face purple with rage. She sputtered, You ungrateful psychotic little, what is wrong with you?" I stood up slowly. I buttoned my suit jacket. I looked down at her dripping, pathetic form. I said, "What is wrong with me is that I finally learned my worth. You do not want a daughter. You want an ATM? You want to bet my boatyard on Fallon's lip gloss? Go to hell, Sabeel. If you or Fallon ever contact me again, I will have you arrested for harassment." I threw a $100 bill on the ruined loan documents to cover my stake, turned on my heel, and walked out of the restaurant. My spine was straight. My hands were perfectly steady. I drove the 4 hours back to the lake with the windows down, letting the freezing night air roar through the cabin, laughing until tears streamed down my face. It was the most liberating moment of my life. I had severed the cord. I had won. But I was wrong. The war was not over. Because toxic people do not surrender when you set a boundary. They just change their tactics. They realize they cannot manipulate you while you are awake. So they wait in the shadows for a moment of weakness. And 3 years later, as my grandfather lay dying, they found their opening. They were about to execute a plan so twisted, so unbelievably greedy that it would force me to burn their entire world to ash in front of everyone they knew. My life at Callahan Classic Boats moved into a golden era. I was not just scraping by anymore. I was thriving. I had built a reputation that extended far beyond the local lake. The yard was consistently booked, the crew was loyal and haze, and I had built a quiet, solid life together. But the universe has a very funny way of delivering karma, and my delivery arrived in the form of a 70-year-old billionaire real estate mogul named Vivian Kensington. Vivian was a force of nature. She drove a vintage convertible, wore massive diamond rings on sunspot hands, and collected classic mahogany speedboats, the way other wealthy people collected fine art. She had heard about my restoration work and decided to bring her entire fleet of 3 extremely rare antique yachts to my yard for a full multi-million-dollar overhaul. But there was a catch, a beautiful, hilarious catch. Vivian Kensington happened to be the reigning queen of the high society country club back in my hometown. She was the woman my mother Sibyl had spent the last 20 years desperately trying to impress, emulate, and dethrone. Sibyl obsessed over Vivian. She copied Vivian's landscaping, bought knockoff versions of Vivian's designer dresses, and constantly tried to insert herself into Vivian's charity committees, only to be politely but firmly ignored. I did not know any of this when I took the contract. I just knew Vivian was a demanding but fair client who paid her invoices the same day they were issued. Over the course of a year, Vivian and I actually became somewhat close. She respected my work ethic. She liked that I did not back down when she suggested design changes that would compromise the historical integrity of her boats. I told her no, and she respected me for it. When the restoration of her prized flagship yacht was finally complete, Vivian was so thrilled that she invited a premier luxury lifestyle magazine to do a massive feature on the boat. The magazine sent a photographer to my yard. We spent 2 days shooting the gleaming mahogany hull, the custom leather seats, and the immaculate chrome fittings. A month later, the magazine hit the stands. It was a glossy 10-page spread. But Vivian had done something I completely did not expect. She did not just talk about the boat, she spent half the article talking about me. There was a full-page photo of me, standing on the docks, wearing my grandfather's worn leather work gloves looking out over the water. Next to the photo was a quote from Vivian, printed in huge bold letters. It read, "Merritt Callahan is a visionary. In a world full of shallow, status-obsessed climbers, Merritt possesses a rare, authentic brilliance. She is a self-made talent that the superficial circles of the state could never possibly comprehend or appreciate." It was a glowing endorsement. It was also a direct public slap in the face to the exact social circle my mother worshipped. 2 days after the magazine was published, my phone practically vibrated off the desk in my office. It was a string of text messages from Sibyl. I had blocked her number years ago, but toxic parents always find a way. She had bought a cheap prepaid phone just to get through to me. The messages came in like rapid-fire bullets. "How dare you? You manipulative little snake. You deliberately sought out Vivian Kensington just to humiliate me. You know exactly what that woman thinks of our family. You fed her lies about us, did you not? You sat on your little docks and played the victim so she would put you in her magazine. You are an ungrateful, spiteful child. You are an embarrassment to the family name. Do not think you have won anything." I read the texts while drinking my morning coffee. I did not feel angry. I did not feel triggered. I just felt a profound sense of amusement. The irony was absolutely exquisite. The daughter she had discarded and deemed worthless was now the celebrated prodigy of the woman she idolized the most. I did not reply. I deleted the messages, tossed the prepaid number onto my block list, and went back out to the yard. I thought her rage was just the sting of a wounded ego. I had no idea that her jealousy was about to mutate into a calculated, predatory plan to steal my entire livelihood. What do you do when the people who threw you away decide they suddenly want the empire you built? Year 7 of my exile brought the coldest winter Michigan had seen in a decade. The lake froze solid by mid-January, and the wind off the ice was sharp enough to cut exposed skin. Inside the main shed, however, the massive industrial heaters hummed, keeping the air warm and smelling of fresh cedar. I was in the office going over peril when my cell phone chimed. It was a message from my cousin Tamsin. Tamsin was the only person from my extended family who had never bought into Sabile's toxic narrative. She was the one who had occasionally slipped me $20 bills when I was a broke teenager, and the only one who had secretly kept in touch with me after I left. Her message contained 3 words. You need to see this. Attached below the text was a screenshot. It was an image captured from a private family group chat. The chat was titled The Real Family. I zoomed in on the image. The conversations was between Sabile, Alden, Fallon, and my Aunt Rowena. As I read the words on the screen, the warm air in the office suddenly felt freezing cold. Sabile had written, "The meeting went perfectly. The commercial real estate broker confirmed the lakefront property is worth easily $3 million, maybe more, with the updated facilities that little brat built. I got him to sign a preliminary intent to buy. He gave me a $50,000 good faith deposit in cash to lock in his priority position." Alden had replied, "Are you sure we can legally sell it right away? What if the old man drags it out?" Sabile fired back. "He is 77 and has a heart condition. The doctor said he is failing. The second he flatlines, the property defaults to me as his only child. We kick Merritt out, sell the dirt to the broker, and split the cash." Then came Fallon's message. She had added 3 laughing emojis. She wrote, "Make sure you give her 30 days notice before the eviction. I do not want her claiming squatters' rights. Oh, and see if the broker will let me keep one of those expensive Sanders as a souvenir. Lol." I sat in my office chair and read the screenshot 5 times. My own mother had already collected a $50,000 cash bribe from a dirty real estate broker to sell my grandfather's land out from under us. They were hovering like vultures, literally counting down the days until my grandfather died so they could swoop in, render me homeless, destroy my business, and walk away with millions of dollars. They had planned it all. The betrayal was so deep, so fundamentally evil that it completely bypassed my emotions and went straight to my survival instincts. I printed the screenshot. I folded the paper, put it in my jacket pocket, and walked up the snowy path to the main house. Grandpa Callahan was sitting in his worn armchair by the fireplace, reading a book on naval history. His breathing was shallow. He had aged significantly over the last few years, his body finally giving in to decades of hard labor. I poured us both a cup of black coffee, sat on the stone hearth across from him, and handed him the piece of paper. I said, "Tam sent this to me 10 minutes ago. You need to read it." He put on his reading glasses. I watched his eyes scan the printed messages. I expected him to be furious. I expected him to yell or cry or curse his daughter's name. Instead, he did something that chilled me to the bone. He chuckled. It was a dry, raspy, humorless sound. He took off his glasses, folded the paper neatly in half, and set it on the coffee table. He looked at me with eyes that were absolutely terrifying in their clarity. He said, "Well, Sabile always did like counting chickens before they hatched. Hand me my cane, Merritt." I helped him stand. We walked slowly down the short hallway to his bedroom. He went straight to the heavy steel safe bolted to the floor in his closet. He spun the dial, pulled the heavy door open, and reached inside. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. He handed it to me. He said, "Open it." I opened the flap. Inside was a stack of legal documents printed on heavy watermarked paper. I pulled out the top document. It was a property deed. At the bottom right corner was a bright red embossed seal from the county clerk's office. I started reading the legal jargon, my eyes scanning the dense text until I hit the critical paragraph. The document stated that Arthur Callahan had irrevocably transferred full, unencumbered ownership of the entire 300-acre lakefront property, all commercial buildings, and all business assets associated with Callahan Classic Boats to one Merritt Callahan. I looked at the date next to the red seal. It was dated exactly 3 years ago. My breath caught in my throat. I looked up at him. My hands were shaking. I said, "Grandpa, what is this? When did you do this?" He sat down on the edge of his bed, leaning on his cane. He said, "I did it the week after Sibyl sent Rowena to dump that oil behind your shed. I knew then that they were never going to stop trying to break you. And I knew that when I died, Sibyl would use the probate courts to tie you up in legal fees until you starved. So, I had Stellan draw up the papers. I went down to the county office myself. I signed it all over. I paid the transfer taxes. It is airtight merit. The land is not mine, it is yours. It has been yours for 3 years. I fell to my knees in front of him. I pressed my face into his rough flannel coat knee and sobbed. I sobbed for the 12-year-old girl left in the rain. I sobbed for the 25-year-old girl who canceled her own birthday. And I sobbed because for the first time in my entire life, someone had chosen me. Someone had put an iron shield around me that my mother could never ever break. He stroked my hair with a trembling hand. He said, "Do not cry for them, kid. Let them plan. Let Sibyl take the dirty broker's money. Let them build their little imaginary castle in the sky. Because the higher they build it, the harder they are going to hit the concrete when you knock it down." I wiped my face. I stood up. I looked at the red seal on the deed, and I made a silent promise to the man who saved my life. I was not just going to knock their castle down. I was going to obliterate it. How far would you let your enemies walk into a trap before you pull the lever? Year 9 brought the end of an era. The heart condition that had been slowly wearing Grandpa Callahan down finally took its ultimate toll. By early spring, he was no longer able to leave his bed. We set up hospice care in the front room of the house, positioning his hospital bed so he could look out the large bay windows and see the lake and the boat shed he loved so much. I cut my client load in half. I hired a manager to run the day-to-day operations of the yard. For 6 weeks, my entire world shrank to the size of that front room. Hayes moved in with me permanently, taking over the night shifts so I could sleep. My crew stopped by every afternoon, bringing him soup and telling him exaggerated stories about difficult customers, just to make him smile. It was a hard time, but it was a holy time. It was filled with genuine love and profound respect. Then the vultures smelled death. Sibyl, Alden, and Fallon arrived on a Tuesday. They drove up in a brand-new luxury SUV, stepping out onto the gravel in expensive, dark, somber clothing. They looked like actors arriving on the set of a tragic movie. They had not visited or called in years, but now that the end was near, they needed to secure their positions. They needed to make sure they were physically present to stake their claim on the estate. They walked into the house as if they owned it. Sibyl immediately began reordering the furniture, complaining about the smell of the medical equipment, and loudly telling the hospice nurses how exhausted she was from the drive. Fallon sat in the corner, taking carefully posed selfies with a sad expression to post on her social media accounts. Alden stood awkwardly by the door, completely useless. I ignored them. I focused entirely on my grandfather, but Sibyl could not help herself. The greed was a disease that ate her from the inside out. On their 3rd day there, I was walking down the hallway toward the kitchen when I heard Sibyl speaking in a hushed, urgent whisper. I stopped and peeked around the corner. She had cornered one of the visiting hospice administrators near the back door. Sibyl was saying, "Yes, I am his daughter and his sole heir. I need to update the billing information. My father has a substantial life insurance policy and a dedicated Medicare disbursement account. Since I am the one managing his final affairs and paying for all these expensive end-of-life comforts, I need you to redirect any remaining medical account balances and Social Security death benefits directly to my personal routing number." I felt a surge of pure unadulterated disgust. She was literally trying to steal his final meager benefits while he was still breathing in the next room. She was trying to intercept the funds by claiming she was the one paying for his care. I stepped out from behind the corner. I walked calmly into the kitchen. The administrator looked uncomfortable. Sibyl froze. Her eyes start darting away guilty. I opened the top drawer of the kitchen island. I pulled out a thick binder labeled medical expenses. I dropped it onto the granite counter with a loud, heavy thud. I looked at the administrator. I said, "Excuse me, there seems to be a misunderstanding. Every single bill for Arthur Callahan's medical care, from the hospital bed to the daily nursing visits to the oxygen tanks, has been paid in full in cash by me. Merritt Callahan. All the receipts are in this binder, processed through my business account. My mother has not contributed a single red cent. If you alter any financial directives based on her fraudulent claims, I will have my attorney file charges against your agency before the sun goes down." The administrator turned pale, nodded quickly, and practically ran out the back door. I turned to face my mother. Sibyl's face was twisted in a mixture of extreme embarrassment and furious rage. She hissed, "How dare you humiliate me in front of the help? I am his daughter. It is my legal right to manage his estate. You are just a glorified mechanic who got lucky. Enjoy playing nurse while you can merit, because the second he is gone, things are going to change around here very quickly." I did not raise my voice. I leaned in close to her. I smelled her expensive cloying perfume. I said, "You are right, Sibyl. Things are going to change, and you have absolutely no idea what is coming." She sneered and walked away. 2 nights later, the house was perfectly quiet. The wind off the lake had died down. I was sitting in the armchair, next to Grandpa Callahan's bed, reading aloud from his favorite naval history book. Hayes was asleep on the couch nearby. Grandpa raised a weak hand and touched my arm. I stopped reading. I looked at him. His breathing was very slow, his eyes were tired, but they were peaceful. He pointed a trembling finger toward the small table next to the bed. Sitting on top of a stack of books were the old cracked leather work gloves he had thrown at me 9 years ago. I picked them up. I looked back at him. He whispered, "Put them on." I slid my hands into the stiff, heavy leather. They slid on easily. The fingers, which had once been comically large on me, now fit perfectly over my calluses and widened knuckles. The gloves fit like a second skin. He smiled. It was the truest, warmest smile I had ever seen. He closed his eyes, let out one long final breath, and did not take another. I sat there in the silence, wearing the gloves, and let the tears fall. The man who saved me was gone. Now it was just me, the empire we built, and the war that was about to begin. Are you ready to see a toxic family walk blindly into their own execution? We buried Arthur Callahan on a crisp, clear Friday afternoon in the small community cemetery that overlooked the lake. The turnout was staggering. It felt like the entire county had shut down to pay their respects. There were hundreds of people standing shoulder to shoulder on the manicured grass. My mechanics were there, standing tall in their best suits. Hayes held my hand the entire time. Business owners, harbor masters, wealthy clients like Vivian Kensington and local fishermen all stood in absolute silence as the casket was lowered. It was a beautiful testament to a life well lived, and my family ruined it with their spectacular, nauseating performance. Sibyl wore a custom-made black designer dress and an oversized hat with a dark veil, looking like a grieving widow from a soap opera. She spent the entire service working the crowd like a politician at a fundraising gala. She handed out her real estate business cards to the wealthy boat owners, whispering about how she was about to inherit a massive lakefront portfolio. Fallon was even worse. When the priest said the final amen, Fallon let out a loud theatrical wail, collapsed dramatically to her knees on the artificial turf, and demanded that 3 different men help carry her back to the SUV because she was overcome with grief. People who actually knew my grandfather just stared at her with open disgust. Alden trailed behind them, carrying Fallon's designer purse and looking at the ground. I stood by the grave long after the crowd had dispersed. I did not cry. I had done my crying in the quiet dark of the front room. Now I was just cold. I was focused. As I turned to walk back to my truck, I saw Sibyl waiting for me by the cemetery gates. The mourning veil was pushed back, and her eyes were hard and calculating. She did not offer me a hug. She did not offer condolences. She got straight to the business of stealing my life. She stopped me and lowered her voice into a sharp, commanding tone. She said, "Merritt, this is obviously a difficult time for all of us, but we need to be practical. The estate needs to be settled quickly so the property does not depreciate. I have made arrangements. Tomorrow morning, Saturday at 11 sharp, I am bringing my attorney and an exclusive real estate broker out to the boatyard. We are going to do a full walkthrough, appraise the assets, and read the updated will. I looked at her. I noted the word updated. I knew exactly what that meant. She had forged something. She had created a fake document to speed up her theft. She continued, her tone dripping with fake sympathy. She said, "I know you have grown attached to your little workshop. So, out of the goodness of my heart, I am willing to give you a 30-day grace period to pack up your tools and vacate the premises before the new buyers take possession. Do not make this difficult, Merritt. Just be there tomorrow so we can hand over the keys smoothly." She was evicting me. At her own father's funeral, before the dirt was even settled over his casket, she was casually informing me that I had 30 days to pack up 9 years of blood, sweat, and millions of dollars in equity and hand it over to her. She thought she held every single card in the deck. I looked at her perfectly manicured face. I felt the heavy weight of the printed deed sitting in the safe back at the house. I thought about the $50,000 bribe she took. I thought about the 12-year-old girl walking home in the rain. I gave her a slow, pleasant smile, the kind of smile a spider gives a fly that just landed on the web. I said, "Tomorrow at 11 sounds perfect, Sibyl. Please bring everyone you need. Bring the lawyer. Bring the broker. I will make sure the yard is open, and I will have everyone waiting for you. Let us settle this once and for all." She looked slightly confused by my lack of resistance, but her greed quickly overrode her suspicion. She smirked triumphantly. She said, "Good. I am glad you are finally acting like the strong one we raised you to be." She turned and walked away, her high heels clicking on the pavement. I got into my truck. I pulled out my phone and made 3 phone calls. The first was to Stellan, my grandfather's real attorney. The second was to Hayes, and the third was to a very specific corporate contact in the city. I was not just going to stop her. I was going to construct a public stage, turn a spotlight on her, and let her destroy herself in front of an audience. What happens when the people who think they own the world find out they do not even own the ground they are standing on? Saturday morning arrived with bright, harsh sunlight reflecting off the freezing water of the lake. The boatyard looked magnificent. The massive bay doors of the main sheds were rolled up, revealing half a dozen multi-million-dollar antique yachts in various stages of flawless restoration. The paved lot was swept clean. It looked exactly like what it was, a highly lucrative, elite commercial enterprise. I did not prepare a private room for this meeting. I set up a long wooden table right in the middle of the main courtyard under the open sky, surrounded by the towering sheds. I brewed a large urn of coffee. By 10:30, my audience began to arrive. I had invited 30 people to what I called an informal memorial brunch for my grandfather. My entire crew was there. Tamsin was there. Several of my wealthiest, most influential clients were there, including Vivian Kensington, who sat in a folding chair, wearing a fur coat, and sipping black coffee, looking highly entertained. Hayes stood directly behind my right shoulder, his arms crossed over his chest, looking like a stone wall. And sitting quietly at the far end of the table, blending imperfectly, was Stellan, the real estate attorney who had drafted the deed 3 years ago. At exactly 11, the sound of crunching gravel echoed through the yard. A massive black luxury SUV pulled through the front gates. The villains had arrived. Sibyl stepped out first, wearing a sharp, aggressive business suit. Alden scurried out behind her, holding a briefcase. Fallon emerged, complaining loudly about the cold wind messing up her hair. Then the hired gun stepped out. The first was a slick, overly tan man in a cheap suit carrying a leather portfolio. This was the dirty broker who had paid Sibyl the $50,000 bribe. The second man was an older, nervous-looking fellow, clutching a legal pad. This was clearly the fake lawyer Sibyl had hired to legitimize her coup. Sibyl walked toward the courtyard, her eyes scanning the crowd. She looked surprised to see so many people, but I watched her quickly process the situation and decide to use it to her advantage. She thought this was an audience to witness her triumph. She thought she was about to look like a benevolent queen, showing mercy to her peasant daughter. She walked to the head of the wooden table. She did not offer me a greeting. She simply clinked a silver spoon against a coffee mug to demand everyone's attention. The yard went dead silent. The only sound was the wind coming off the lake. Sibyl projected her voice, putting on her best, most tragic theatrical tone. She said, "Thank you all for being here to honor my father. As his only child and the sole executive of his legacy, this is a very heavy burden for me. But my father and I had many long talks before he passed. He wanted this property to reach its highest potential. He wanted his family to be financially secure. Therefore, it is with a heavy heart that I must announce that Callahan Classic Boats and the surrounding acreage are officially being liquidated and sold." A murmur rippled through the crowd. My mechanics exchanged confused, angry looks. Vivian Kensington raised one perfectly arched eyebrow. I just stood there, my hands resting lightly on the table, my face completely blank. Sybil continued, waving a hand toward her nervous lawyer. She said, "My attorney here has the updated will, which my father signed in his final days, granting me total legal authority to expedite this sale. We already have a premium buyer lined up." She turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were cruel, triumphant, and completely merciless. She was enjoying this. She wanted to break me in front of my own people. She said, "Merritt, we appreciate the little hobby shop you ran here for the last few years. It kept the old man busy. As a gesture of family goodwill, my buyer has agreed to let you take your personal toolboxes when you leave. You have until the end of the month to vacate the residential house and clear your junk out of the sheds. I suggest you start packing today." She folded her arms and smiled. The dirty broker smirked. Fallon pulled out her phone and started recording a video, hoping to capture my emotional breakdown for her social media feed. The silence in the courtyard was thick enough to choke on. Everyone was staring at me, waiting for the explosion. I picked up my coffee mug. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The coffee was excellent. I set the mug down. I looked Sybil directly in the eye, and my voice rang out across the courtyard, calm, clear, and absolutely lethal. I said, "That was a beautiful speech, Sybil. There is only one minor technical problem with your plan." Sybil scoffed, rolling her eyes. She said, "Do not embarrass yourself, Merritt. There are no problems. The will is signed, the sale is happening, you have no legal standing here." I smiled. The spiderweb snapped shut. I said, "Actually, Sybil, you cannot sell the property because you cannot sell something you do not own." "Stellan, would you mind bringing everyone up to speed? It is time to drop the hammer." The quiet, unassuming man sitting at the end of the table stood up. Stellan unbuttoned his overcoat, adjusted his glasses, and pulled a heavy manila folder from his leather satchel. He walked calmly to the center of the table, standing directly across from Sibyl and her fake lawyer. Sibyl frowned, her arrogant smile faltering for the very first time. She said, "Who the hell are you?" Stellan did not raise his voice. He spoke with the measured, terrifying authority of a man who knows the law inside and out. He said, "My name is Stellan Vance. I was Arthur Callahan's personal attorney for the last 25 years, and I am here to inform you that the document you are holding is entirely worthless." Sibyl's face flushed a violent, angry red. She slammed her hand on the table. She yelled, "You are lying. My father signed this while leaving everything to me. I have the paperwork right here." Stellan opened his folder. He pulled out the heavy watermarked document with a bright red county seal. He laid it flat on the wooden table, directly under the bright morning sun. He said, "I will only dictates the distribution of assets owned by the deceased at the time of death." Arthur Callahan did not own this property when he died. Exactly 3 years and 2 months ago, Arthur Callahan executed an irrevocable deed transfer. He legally gifted the entirety of the 300-acre estate, the commercial buildings, and all business assets to his granddaughter, Merritt Callahan. The taxes were paid. The deed was recorded with the county clerk. This land has been the sole exclusive property of Merritt Callahan for over 1,000 days. There is no estate to probate. There is nothing for you to inherit. and there is absolutely nothing for you to sell. I watched the exact second Sabile's reality shattered. It was not a slow realization. It was an instant catastrophic collapse. All the blood drained from her face, leaving her a sickly, chalky white. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at the red seal on the deed as if it were a venomous snake. Her fake lawyer leaned over, looked at the county stamp on the deed, and immediately took 3 massive steps backward, physically distancing himself from Sabile. He knew a bulletproof legal document when he saw one, and he knew she had dragged him into a massive liability. Alden gasped, his knees buckling slightly, so he had to grab the edge of the table to stay upright. Fallon stopped recording her video. Her phone slipped from her hand and clattered loudly onto the pavement. Civil started hyperventilating. She pointed a trembling, manic finger at me. She shrieked, "This is fraud. You manipulated a dying old man. You stole my inheritance. I will sue you. I will drag you through the courts until you are bankrupt." Stellan adjusted his glasses. He said mildly, "You're welcome to try, ma'am, but I have sworn affidavit from 2 doctors, a harbor master, and a notary public attesting to Arthur's perfect mental capacity on the day he signed it. If you file a frivolous lawsuit, we will counter-sue for legal fees and file a formal complaint against your real estate license for attempting to execute a fraudulent sale." Sabile whipped her head around, looking frantically at her hired broker. She yelled, "Do something, you gave me $50,000. Tell them we have a binding contract." The overly tanned broker let out a heavy sigh. He reached up and slowly took off his expensive sunglasses. He looked at Sabile with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. He said, "I am afraid I cannot do that, Sabile." Sabile shrieked. "Why not?" The broker turned his body away from her. He looked at me, gave a highly respectful nod, and said, "Because Sabile, my brokerage firm, was acquired 6 months ago by a commercial holding group based out of Chicago. The majority shareholder and CEO of that holding group is Merritt Callahan. You did not take a $50,000 deposit from an independent buyer. You took a deposit from a subsidiary company owned by your own daughter. You literally tried to sell Merritt's land to Merritt's own employee." A collective gasp echoed through the crowd. Vivian Kensington let out a loud, delighted bark of laughter that cracked like a whip across the yard. Sabile's eyes rolled back in her head. The sheer, overwhelming humiliation of being outplayed on such a massive, multi-layered scale physically broke her. She let out a guttural, animalistic scream of pure rage. She lunged forward, trying to grab the deed off the table. Hayes stepped forward instantly. He did not hit her. He just placed his massive frame between Sabile and the table, and a movable wall of muscle and protective fury. Seeing that violence was impossible, Fallon immediately resorted to the only tactic she knew, the Golden Child playbook. She let out a loud, dramatic wail, clutched her chest, and threw herself backward onto the hard pavement, pretending to have a massive panic attack. She thrashed her legs, waiting for the crowd to rush to her aid, waiting for the world to stop and cater to her fake emergency. But no one moved. 30 people stood in a circle around her, staring down at her in absolute disgusted silence. The magic spell was broken. Here in the real world, away from the toxic bubble of my parents' house, no one cared about her fake tears. Fallon lay on the cold pavement, looking around frantically, realizing for the first time in her life that she was entirely powerless. Alden stepped away from his wife. He looked at me, his eyes were welling with tears. He took a step toward me, reaching out a trembling hand. He whispered, "Merritt, oh my God, Merritt, please, I am so sorry. I did not know. Let me explain. I am your father." I looked at the man who had let me walk home in the rain, the man who had let my mother hijack my birthday, the man who had stood by while they tried to steal my grandfather's land. I raised one hand, palm out, stopping him dead in his tracks. I said, "No, you are not my father. You are just a coward who married a thief." I looked at the 3 of them, the ruined mother, the useless father, and the pathetic sister writhing on the ground. I had won the war, and it was time to sweep the battlefield clean. I stepped around the wooden table. I did not yell. I did not curse. The anger had completely left my body, replaced by a profound, chilling emptiness. I looked at Sybil, who was leaning heavily against the SUV, gasping for air. I said, "My grandfather gave you one final test. He let you believe you had won just to see if you would show a single ounce of decency. You failed. You brought a fake lawyer to a funeral to steal from your own child. Now you owe my holding company $50. Zero Zune for breaching a fraudulent contract. I suggest you wire the funds by Monday morning, or my corporate attorneys will place a lien on your personal home." Sybil stared at me with pure hatred, but she did not say a word. The fight was completely beaten out of her. I pointed toward the heavy iron gates at the entrance of the property. I said, "Pick your daughter up off the floor, get in your car, and never ever set foot on my property again." Alden reached down and hauled Fallon up by her arm. She was covered in gravel dust, her designer clothes ruined, mascara running down her face. She did not look at me. Sybil practically crawled into the passenger seat of the SUV. Alden got behind the wheel. The fake lawyer and the dirty broker ran to their own vehicles, desperate to escape the blast radius. The SUV started up. Alden put it in reverse, turned clumsily, and drove toward the exit. The tires spun in the gravel, kicking up a cloud of gray dust. I walked behind them. I followed the SUV all the way down the long driveway to the main entrance. When the back bumper cleared the property line and pulled onto the county road, I grabbed the heavy iron gates. I pulled them shut. The latch engaged with a loud, final, echoing metallic cling. I slid the heavy steel padlock into place and turned the key. I stood at the fence and watched the black SUV disappear down the highway, shrinking into a tiny speck until it vanished completely. The toxic cord was severed. The poison was gone. The yard was quiet except for the sound of the lake water lapping against the docks and the low murmur of my friends and clients walking back toward the coffee urn. I turned around and looked at the empire I had built. The towering sheds, the beautiful boats, the people who actually loved me standing in the sun. I took a deep breath of the freezing Michigan air. It tasted like absolute freedom. That was 1 year ago. Since that day, Callahan Classic Boats has expanded even further. We bought the adjacent property and opened a maritime museum to display some of the rarest boats we restore. Vivian Kensington funded the museum pavilion and insisted on naming it after my grandfather 6 months ago, under a canopy of oak trees right there in the main courtyard. Hayes and I got married. It was a small, loud, beautiful wedding. Tamsin was my maid of honor. My mechanics built the wedding arch out of polished mahogany. There were no fake panic attacks. There was no drama. It was just joy. I never received the $50,000 from Sybil. Instead, Tamsin told me that Sybil had to quietly sell her prized country club membership to cover the corporate fines and avoid a massive public lawsuit. Vivian Kensington personally voted to approve the sale of her membership, ensuring Sybil was officially exiled from the high society she loved more than her own children. Fallon is currently working as a cashier at a discount clothing store, constantly complaining to anyone who will listen that she was cheated out of her destiny. And then there is Alden. My father calls my office phone line once a month. He leaves long rambling voicemails. He cries. He talks about how he chose the wrong side. He talks about how Sybil's anger has made their house a living hell and how he just wants to sit down and have a cup of coffee with his successful daughter. He begs for forgiveness. He begs for a chance to be the father he never was. I never call him back. I listen to the first 10 seconds of the voicemail, just long enough to hear the regret in his voice, and then I hit the delete button. Some people tell me I should take pity on him. They say he was a victim of Sybil's abuse too, and that I should be the bigger person and let an old man make peace before he dies. But I look at the blisters that have turned into permanent calluses on my hands. I look at the gates he allowed me to be locked behind when I was just a child asking for a sliver of love. And I realize that forgiveness is a gift you give to people who actually try to protect you, not to the people who stood by and watched you bleed. So I leave the gates locked. I let the silence be my final answer. What do you think? Am I being too cruel by refusing to answer my father's desperate calls for forgiveness? Or is my silence exactly the justice a lifetime of cowardice deserves? Let me know what you think down in the comments. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had to build your own table because your family refused to give you a seat, remember that you are not alone and your strength is your ultimate weapon. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that the best revenge is massive, unstoppable success. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next.